And a very happy Wednesday to you at 12:07 in the West. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show, broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios. Mr. Randy Wang has the week off. He'll be back with us on Monday. And by the looks of all of his food porn pictures that he's been posting, he'll be well fed. 800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. We have a big show for you today. My colleague over at the Southern California News Group, Susan Shelley, joins us after the news at 1 as part of the Fix California Hour. And LA City Councilwoman Tracy Parks, who represents Venice, joins us the 2 o'clock hour. But first, as I was preparing for the show today, I always have the television on in the background. Because even if I'm working on my column and I have the sound off, I always want to be aware if there's some kind of breaking news. I can't come on this radio station if a hurricane hits somewhere or there is a massive earthquake or the stock market failed or something like that happened, because I have my eyes and ears shut off to the rest of the world because I'm working on a newspaper column. So I figure if I have the television on in the background, even if the sound is off, if there's some huge breaking news, I'll be able to see it and I'll pay attention to it and I'll know about it by the time this radio program starts. And I saw on my television screen these aerial shots, these helicopter shots of a parking lot and a line of people that seemed to go on forever. And I thought to myself, oh no, not another active shooter. What are they evacuating now? So I walk over to the remote control. It takes me about 15 minutes of cursing at it to figure out how to turn the sound on. After I figure out how to turn the sound on, I then realize what is going on the television screen. It's not an active shooter. It's not an evacuation for a natural disaster. No, the state of Colorado just got their first In-N-Out burger. And there was a line of people that went all the way from Aurora, Colorado to Denver. Apparently, people started waiting in line for this In-N-Out burger for 14 hours before the restaurant finally opened. And when the restaurant finally opened, to get a burger, you still had to wait in line for hours and hours and hours. And who knows if they ran out of food or not, but that In-N-Out burger was absolutely jam-packed. On the days when there's bad news in California and you say to yourself, why is it again that we live here? We have to put up with the homeless. We have to put up with the trash. We have to put up with the crime. We have to put up with the taxes. We have to put up with all the stupidity that we have to put up with on a daily basis. Why do we do it? And one of the answers is you don't have to wait 14 hours for a double-double. But in the state of Colorado, they now have their In-N-Out burger, so hopefully the line won't be that long in perpetuity. Now, don't know if you've been following this story, but this is a strange one. Apparently, the state's lieutenant governor, Eleni Kounalakis, who is running for governor here in California, so she's trying to rattle the cage and make a name for herself, do what she can to become a household name, considering the fact that no one can pronounce her name. Anyway, she is now calling on singer Taylor Swift to postpone her Los Angeles concerts, standing in solidarity with striking hotel workers and risking scorn, by the way, from all the Swifties who have already purchased their tickets ready to see Taylor Swift. The lieutenant governor and dozens of elected officials from across the state signed their names to a campaign organized by Unite Here Local 11 to put pressure on the music icon. Swift, by the way, is scheduled to perform 6 sold-out shows at Inglewood SoFi Stadium beginning Thursday and continuing through August the 9th. Kounalakis, who attended Swift's Eras Tour in Santa Clara and is the first major candidate running for governor in 2026, said all workers deserve dignity and fair wages In the letter to Swift, Kanalakis and the others wrote that the tour makes area hotels lots of money, with Los Angeles area businesses doubling and tripling what they charge because you're coming. At the same time, the group wrote that many hotel housekeepers and other workers in the region can't afford to live close to their jobs, and some sleep in their cars and risk losing their homes. So she wants Taylor Swift to cancel her sold-out concerts, 6 of them at SoFi Stadium. And SoFi Stadium, that's not some tiny little theater on Santa Monica Boulevard that seats 99 people. SoFi Stadium is a football stadium. What could they fit in there? 60,000 people for a football game? Maybe 70,000 for a concert? What kind of money do you think she's pulling in per night? I heard a story when Kathy Griffin got canceled for the picture she did with Donald Trump's bloodied head, and she lost all of her gigs, that when she would appear at a casino, and you're not talking about a football stadium at a casino in Las Vegas. You're talking about a healthy-sized theater, but you're not talking about a football stadium. When she would play Caesars or one of those big casinos in Las Vegas, you're talking $60,000, $70,000 a night. If Kathy Griffin is pulling in $60,000 or $70,000 a night for a theater at a casino in Las Vegas, what do you think Taylor Swift is pulling in selling out SoFi Stadium in Inglewood? It's got to be a lot more than that. So far, Taylor Swift has not responded to California's lieutenant governor or the other public officials who are calling on her to cancel her concert, but I wouldn't bet on it. First of all, if I'm Taylor Swift, I want the money. Second of all, these performers are willing to perform anywhere as long as the check clears. It wasn't that long ago that a bunch of them were getting in trouble for performing at the private homes of dictators for birthdays, weddings, and graduations. Could you imagine that gig? Getting that call from your booking manager. Hey, so Taylor, we've got this offer that just came in. What do you think about performing at Gaddafi's house for his daughter's Sweet 16? The money's great. And maybe you can bond with the Gaddafis. It seems like the old man seems to have a handle on what sunglasses are in these days. He likes those hats. And he knows how to do a jerry curl. So why not? What do you think? And it's not just the Taylor Swifts, not that she was one of the ones that performed at Gaddafi's house, but a bunch of them did, a bunch of A-listers. And when they're coming up through the ranks, Gaddafi's house is nothing compared to the venues they had to play at. I remember one story that Doug McIntyre told me. I can't remember who it was, but it was some old-timey jazz performer, and they were playing at a mobbed-up club in Chicago. And that's the way it used to be in the old days. Before the corporations took control, the mob was in charge of everything. It was a lot more family-friendly. And while this performer was backstage getting ready to go on and entertain the audience, the fire marshal showed up. And he said to himself, oh my God, is there a fire somewhere in this venue? Should I be prepared to evacuate? And one of the mobsters goes up to the fire marshal and he says, what are you doing here? And the fire marshal just pointed at his watch. And the guy said, no, it's Tuesday. But that's the way it used to be. Now, these performers don't have to play the mobbed up clubs to make a buck. Now they can play wherever they want. And usually, they're playing the venues that pay the most. And SoFi Stadium is one of the venues that pays the most. My guess is that Taylor Swift ends up performing these concerts, these 6 dates at SoFi Stadium. There's also something else that's working against the lieutenant governor and the officials who are calling on Taylor Swift to not perform. And that's this. In the modern age, and it happens on both sides of the aisle, but especially on the left, these performers, these public people, don't see themselves as Angelenos. They don't see themselves as Californians. They don't even really see themselves as Americans. They see themselves as people of the world. So issues that grip them, issues that get their attention, issues that generate involvement and activism don't necessarily have to be issues that are happening in their own communities. Remember that those girls in Africa, when bad things were going on over there, and Michelle Obama posted a picture of herself, and she had something written about the girls on a piece of white paper, and she posted it on social media, and then everyone across the land did the same thing. And that was literally on the entire other side of the world. You see these members of Congress that are wearing lapel pins of the Ukrainian flag. Global warming isn't something that they believe impacts one city, one state, one country. To them, that's a global subject, and therefore they look at it in a global sort of way. That's how the new crop sees the world. So if local politicians in a local city or a local state think they're going to generate the attention of a Taylor Swift, and they're going to get Taylor Swift to walk away from millions of dollars, maybe even tens of millions of dollars, to promote their local cause, I think they're out to lunch. This is probably the first time that Taylor Swift has even heard about this conflict. And my guess is if she were to cancel these appearances, she would upset her audience. The audience of this particular union and the local officials who are calling on her to cancel these concert dates are irrelevant to her. They mean nothing to her bottom line. The lieutenant governor can hate her, and she is still going to be living in a mansion doing whatever the hell she wants to do. Flying private jets, avoiding Kanye West, everything that Taylor Swift enjoys. And getting involved in this conflict would do nothing but alienate her with her audience. I don't see Taylor Swift getting involved in this. I don't see Taylor Swift lifting a finger. And you know what? As left-wing as Hollywood is, when it comes down to it, they're about business. Because show business is a business. And that's the business she's in. That's how she makes her money. That's how she pays her bills. Look at the AFTRA strike. Look at the screenwriters strike. Look at what's going on there. You have one of the most liberal industries in the entire nation. You have individuals running these companies who contribute to Democratic politicians all over the country. Sony, Disney, you name it. All of them are loaded with executives who are left of center, to say the least. Yet, when the unions stand in the way of them making a buck, what do? They become union busters. One of the executives in Hollywood was quoted as saying that he wanted the strike to be as harmful as possible to the members. He wanted them to lose their homes. He wanted them to fall behind on their bills. He wanted them to feel the pain, because only when they felt the pain would they come back to the bargaining table and would they roll over and play dead. And the entire object of what they were doing, the strategy, was to make this economically catastrophic for the people who work in that industry. And you say to yourself, they don't sound like left-wing Hollywood types when they're talking about crushing the unions in the industry that they work in. They sound like businessmen from the Gilded Age. They sound like people from a different era, like Carnegie and Stanford and those people. They don't sound like the people that show up to the environmental fundraising groups. They don't sound like the people that show up to NARAL events or Barack Obama fundraisers, but it's the very same people. I don't know if you've ever heard the old adage, where you stand depends on where you sit. But these people sit in the corporate boardroom in Hollywood, which means they want to crush labor. So it doesn't matter that they're left wing. They don't want their left wing politics to get in the way of them creating as many profits as possible for their shareholders. That's why they're doing what they're doing. So when they show up to these fundraisers and they write these checks, they're doing that because it's socially desirable. Because in their industry, if you are seen as being left-wing or seen as being a partisan Democrat, that's a feather in your cap. That gives you social cachet. But in the end, all they really care about is making money. And that's why they're doing what they're doing. I'll give you an example of where you stand depends on where you sit, going the other way. Right now, there is a labor dispute going on at American Airlines. I don't know if you've been following this, but the pilots were threatening to go on strike because they haven't received a contract from the company that they deem to be fair and equitable. And what's interesting about airline pilots is that most of them line up pretty conservatively on most subjects. You have a lot of people who come from the military. They have military backgrounds. A lot of people who went to college to study the hard sciences. These are people who have backgrounds in engineering. These are people who have backgrounds in mathematics. These are people who really understand how machines work, those sorts of things. They also make a lot of money, although it is a weird job. It's like playing baseball professionally. You make nothing when you're in the minor leagues. You eat cat food. And then you finally get to a point to where you make it in the majors, and suddenly you're blowing your nose with $100 bills and washing your hair with Avion and demanding bowls of M&Ms with all the red ones taken out. It's kind of like that for the pilots, where when they first start out, they work them to death and pay them peanuts, or I guess it would be pretzels now because of the peanut allergies on the planes. And then they finally get to the point to where they fly the big boys. They fly the big planes. They fly the 787. They fly the 777. They fly the big Airbuses for one of the big airlines. And they make boatloads of money, and they hardly work. Well, right now they're in a dispute with management. And you read what the pilots are saying, they sound like Flora the Red Menace. And for a group of conservative, mostly guys, they're also going to war with Congress because Congress wants to raise the age limit from 65 to 67, which they do not want. So they're battling with management, and they're battling with mostly Republicans in the U.S. Senate, even though they're largely a conservative work group. So you have a conservative work group going to war with Republicans in Congress and management with the airlines. And in Hollywood, you have a group of left-wing executives trying to crush the unions in their own industry. And then you got Taylor Swift, who has nothing to do with anything, who's now in the middle of a labor dispute involving the hotel workers, and they want her to jump in head first. The common through line I see here is that people look out for themselves. People look out for their pocketbook. People look out for their industry. And while they may have their own personal political beliefs, they may have their own partisan preference, when it's all said and done, and when the music stops, what they're going to do is they're going to take care of their own bottom line. So as I sit here looking at all of this pressure that's being put on Taylor Swift, my guess is Taylor Swift is going to tell him to go to hell. It's 12:27. Let's take a look at the roads. It's 1232 on the John Phillips Show, Talk Radio 790 KABC. If you want to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And, of course, if you want to download past episodes, past editions of the show, that's easy to do. Just take out your handy-dandy iPhone, click the podcast button, type in the name of the show, The John Phillips Show, click subscribe, and all of the shows get downloaded automatically to your phone so you can enjoy them whenever it is that you want to listen to them. It's Woo Wednesday. Thanks, Ric Flair. That means tomorrow is Throwback Thursday, which means later on in the program, we're going to open up the phone lines and you'll get to pick the bumper music for tomorrow's show. Now, since Randy is gone, Art is on the board today. So that means the more obscure, the better. Art told me before the show started, he said, John, I don't want anything normal. I don't want anything easy. I want you to pick something so obscure that it's going to be extremely difficult to find on the internet.
Fake news.
So, when we send out the bat sign, give us a call at 800-222-KABC. And if you are the lucky winner, you'll be able to pick the music for tomorrow's show. AM 790 KABC welcomes Beck and Phoenix to the Kia Forum on August the 7th. Tickets are on sale right now at Ticketmaster.com. However, if you're caller number 9 at 888-790-5222, that's 888-790-5222, you'll win a pair of tickets for the show. All of this furnished by our friends at Live Nation. Good luck dialing. Right now, it's time for Headlines. It's 12:39 on the John Phillips Show, Talk Radio 790 KABC. The Fix California Hour coming up after the news at 1. My colleague over at the Southern California News Group, Susan Shelley, joins us, so make sure you stick around for that. The big story nationally, and it broke during yesterday's show, was that former President Donald Trump was indicted for a second time, this time in Washington, D.C., and on 4 counts. And I spent some time last night watching the talking heads on cable news chew it over, and it was exactly as you would expect. The people that hated Donald Trump were salivating at the mouth, hoping that this will finally be the last nail in his coffin, and this will be the end of Donald Trump's political career. And Republicans were talking about what an abuse of power it was and how it was interesting that it happened a week after Hunter Biden had his plea deal thrown out of court because the judge said it was so grotesque, with the prosecution and the defense being largely on the same side. I looked at it and I said to myself, beware of the law of unintended consequences. Just because you think something is going to happen, don't assume that you're going to get the answer that you want. And that is what I see written all over this. Democrats think, because they regard Donald Trump as a criminal in general, that if they just get him on something, that's fine, and it doesn't matter what it is, because he's a crook, he's a criminal, get rid of him, and do it yesterday. That's the attitude. And it doesn't matter if you do it in a city where 9 out of 10 people are Democrats, and any Republican who's brought up on charges in front of a jury in Washington, D.C., don't even have the trial. Don't even bother. Why waste the money? You know what the outcome is going to be. But from their point of view, who cares? As long as we get the outcome we want, that's all that matters. I think to a certain extent, they're worried that they won't get a conviction in the state of Florida. So they have to have something that's a sure thing in their hip pocket to make sure that Donald Trump isn't the next president of the United States. And I would caution them to go down this road. I would caution them to try to imprison their political enemies. Because whatever it is that you do to someone else will eventually be done to you. So don't be surprised. Don't be upset. Don't kick and scream, because you should know that it's coming. And in politics, we've seen this happen time and time and time again. Let's take the filibuster. The Senate has operated with a filibuster since its inception. The reason that the Senate has the filibuster is the Senate is supposed to let all of the legislation from the House cool off before they decide what to do with it. In fact, when the Senate was being described by our founding fathers, I think it was James Madison, he said it was pouring coffee or tea into a saucer to let it cool off before you drank it. That's the point of the Senate. Nothing's supposed to happen fast there. Everything is supposed to take forever. Hell, half of them are demented. They can't do anything quickly. Probably takes half the Senate 45 minutes to get through one trip to the urinal. But the Democrats were frustrated that their judges weren't going through fast enough. So what did they do? They changed the rules so they could get their judges through, and that made them very happy in the moment. But the Democrats didn't control the Senate forever, and when the Republicans took control of the Senate, they used that same parliamentary trick for a Supreme Court justice to get their Supreme Court nominees through and on the court. And when they did that, the Democrats kicked and screamed and said, no, 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 you can't do that. The filibuster wasn't meant for that, until they changed the rules. But they said, well, wait, we didn't do it for Supreme Court justices. We did it for other judges. Well, guess what? You opened the door. You made your bed. Now sleep in it. For a long time, our current president, Joe Biden, whenever he would get involved in a dispute with a Republican, what would he do? He'd call them racist. He did it to Mitt Romney. He did it to voters, black voters, by the way. Remember he went on a radio show and said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black? What eventually happened to him? The guy who calls everyone who disagrees with him a racist was up on stage with Kamala Harris, who was competing with him for the Democratic nomination. She had to find some line of attack. So what did she do to Grampy Joe? She called him a racist to his face on stage. I'm sure he didn't like it. According to the papers, there was a lot of bad blood between him and Jill and Kamala for a very long time because she called him a racist. But that's what you've done your entire career, Joe. You didn't expect someone to do it to you. It happened. During the Summer of Love, we saw the Chop Zone up in Seattle, where lawlessness just absolutely took over a huge portion of the city of Seattle. And the city said, oh, no, we can't do anything about that. We had the BLM protests and riots that burned down buildings all over the United States. And the police forces were told to stand down. And this, by the way, happened when we had COVID-19 lockdowns. We weren't even supposed to be out of our homes. We were supposed to be wearing the masks. We were supposed to be 6 feet apart from one another. They're right on top of one another, burning down the cities. But it was justified. We were told by our dearly elected leaders it was justified. Why? Because they were really mad. And if you're really mad, you can go out and you can burn things down and you can break the law. Then what happens? January the 6th. And they're absolutely fit to be tied over it. How could you do that? How could you storm the Capitol? How could you invade people's workspace? Go to a portion of a building that you're not allowed to be in? How can you do that? Well, for a year, we were told if you're really mad, you can do whatever the hell you want. It was wrong when they burned the cities down. It was wrong when they stormed the Capitol. But you tell people for long enough that if you're really mad, you can do whatever you want. People listen. And then eventually it gets turned around on you. When Joe Biden and the Justice Department decided to charge and eventually hope to imprison their chief political rival, they think it's a one-off because, again, they regard Donald Trump as a criminal. So whatever they do to put him in jail and to keep him out of the White House is justified. Well, here's a little secret. History repeats itself. At some point, it's going to happen to you. And you're not going to like it. And maybe what they'll do is they'll try to put Joe Biden in jail when Republicans take over. If he lives long enough. Or maybe one day we'll wake up and the newspaper will say, Adam Schiff was thrown in prison. Hillary Clinton was thrown in prison. Hunter Biden was thrown in prison. The prosecutor who charged Trump was thrown in prison. If it's okay to just arrest your political foes and to throw them in jail and charge them with crimes in places where you know the jury's going to do what the jury's going to do, then at some point it's going to happen to you too. And if and when that happens, they are going to say that it's the end of democracy, that we live in a fascist state. How dare you arrest your political foes? How dare you charge your political foes? How dare you do something like this? Why in the world would someone ever do this? Just remember, you're doing it now. And people are paying attention. And at some point, it's going to be done to you. They will, of course, completely forget about it by the time it happens to them. But that's what's going to happen. And that's why what they're doing, or one of the reasons why what they're doing is so bad. Because you go down that road and what you end up with is a banana republic. This is what happens in other countries. If you're part of the group that's not in power, you go to jail. We have a system that's supposed to prevent that. But the people in charge are so fearful that Donald Trump's going to be in charge of the government again. This is what they're doing. This is what they've resorted to prevent that from happening. And they do it, by the way, believing they have morality on their side. Again, you're in charge. You won the election. You can do whatever you want. But you're not going to win every election. And at some point, someone who doesn't like you is going to be in charge. And they're going to have all of the levers of power at their disposal. And maybe they'll treat you the same way. It's 12:50. Let's take a look at the road. It's 12:57 on the John Phillips Show, Talk Radio 790 KABC. Well, it's the summer. A lot of people are traveling. A lot of people are experiencing flight delays, flight cancellations. Well, it's not just the passengers that hate the delays. Listen to this story. This, according to the New York Post. A Lufthansa pilot allegedly upset over being forced to divert his flight from Catania flew the commercial airplane into a penis-shaped pattern before landing in Malta. So if you were to look at a picture from the sky over the flight pattern of the plane, you can track where these planes go from the apps. The guy just flew around over the ocean in the shape of a penis when they told him that he couldn't land the plane. The New York Post described the move as ballsy. All right, we've got 2 more hours coming up on the John Phillips Show. Susan Shelley joins us next. This is Talk Radio 790 KAB.